What cards should you be targeting in 2022? Well, in this video, I'm recapping how much the hobby has evolved in the past 2 years to help newbies out and maybe some veterans as well. So we are all targeting that 1% of cards that have the best chance of becoming worthwhile investments and making sure that we are ignoring and avoiding the 99% that absolutely won't be. And at the end, I'll also be shouting out some other great YouTubers that have helped me tremendously on my card journey, and I know they're sure to help you as well. So with that being said, welcome back. Now let's get to work. All right, so in October of 2020, I put out a video titled Sports Card Investing 101, What Cards Should I Buy? And that video did really well. In fact, it got over 160,000 views and earned me about $1,500, which is great. The problem is that this video was relevant for maybe 6 months and now it's completely outdated. So this video is going to be comparing what I said back then to what is relevant now. So new people entering the hobby today will have some sort of a head start. And if you're a seasoned veteran or someone who has followed my journey for a while now, this video is going to be very basic. However, I ask of you to please add some input in the comment section for people newer to cards and make sure that they have a great experience in this amazing hobby. All right, so let's start with the first point, which is this. If you are strictly collecting for yourself and you don't want to ever get rid of the card, then buy whatever you want. The only rule with collecting is that you could afford to pay the seller and that you're not pulling some scam or trying to try to do anything fraudulent like that on anyone or any platform. At the same time, I don't want you to overpay on anything, because if I'm able to help you buy at a good price when the prices are low, then you're probably going to feel really good about your purchase. And also, if you ever do want to move the card, you'll be able to recoup most, if not all, of what you paid for it. So for me, I'm just against overpaying on anything, because when we buy at a good time, then we have a lot more options than when we buy when the prices are high. All right, so let's start with number one, and this is buying what you know the best and believe in the most. And this is what I started with in the past video, and I still believe it's true, because this will be your competitive advantage in a couple of ways. First of all, it will be enjoyable, and cards need to be enjoyable, because at the end of the day, this is a hobby and there are a lot of other ways to make way more money out there than sports cards, but very few ways where you could do so while connecting to your inner child. And the more engaged you are with the sports or non-sports that you already love, the more fun the research side of this will be. And my best example of this was buying a handful of raw Braden Point rookie cards back in early 2020 for about $15 each, because I believed he was on the cusp of becoming a breakout player in the NHL, but very few people knew how good he was, because the Tampa Bay Lightning are a small market team and aren't televised as much, even though they have been really good for the last couple of years. And then when you fast forward to summer of 2020, Braden Point became one of the biggest stars in the NHL during the Lightning's run to the Stanley Cup. And then the following year, the Lightning repeated as Stanley Cup champions, and in part due to Braden Point's incredible play. So when I got those cards back from PSA, I was able to sell a bunch of them for $200 to $300 each, even though I'd only invested about $28 per card on average. Now, financially, that was great, but what was just as cool was that I got even more excitement watching my team play, and the research behind this was fun, because I was researching a player and a sport I actually cared about. Moving on to number two, and that is this. What are the sets and variations we should be targeting? And man, this has changed a ton since that video was released. Back in 2020, it was very simple. Prism Base and Prism Silver in PSA 10 were pretty much the safest cards you could have, because it was like the US dollar. No matter where you went in the world, the US dollar is respected and would be accepted or easily exchanged into whatever country's currency. But now in 2022, Prism Base and even Prism Silver in a PSA 10 slab is like, well, actually it's like the US dollar. No one respects it anymore because it's way overprinted. We also have a huge shift in the demographic of the hobby. Back in 2020 and early 2021, there was a massive number of pure flippers in the hobby.
I'm going to say here now on a national stage, I believe that the culture of sneaker flipping is going to bleed into sports cards because these kids can't get enough inventory with sneakers.
And now in 2022, it appears that most pure flippers have moved on to crypto or metaverse or NFTs or something else. And because they've transitioned out of the hobby, the type of cards that are popular again are cards that actually look good versus looking like a sheet of tinfoil that my double stuffed Chipotle burrito comes in. So to me, the two things that have changed the most is that a card's aesthetics are very important once again. And secondly, scarcity is way more of a priority now compared to a year and a half ago when so many people were entering the space that everything was climbing in value because everything just appeared scarce. Also back then, we didn't know how many of these cards were being printed, and we still don't have an exact number, but we're able to piece this together based on the data that's coming back from the grading companies. And what a lot of people are now realizing is that there is still a shockingly high number of not only base cards, but also these so-called rare parallels out there. So the point is that people want rare cards that look great, but unless it's serial numbered, which means there's a number on the back telling us how many of that card is actually printed, we may not know for a while what the actual scarcity of that card is. And just as importantly, just because it's serial numbered and there might only be, let's say, 99 of that card in existence, that doesn't mean it's valuable when, or as valuable when the manufacturer decides to put out 20 different variations of a card limited to 99 copies this year, while they only did 2 variations limited to 99 last year. Because you're essentially going from 198 serial numbered cards in one year to 1980 serial numbered cards the following year. And I know this gets confusing, but it's really important if you're going to be investing lots of money in cards over this year and going forward, and especially if ultra modern cards are what you'll be targeting. And Sports Card Investor did a really thorough breakdown of this topic on a video titled, "Did Panini Destroy, Select, and Ruin My $500,000 Investments?" Besides that, rookie cards are still the safest for the most part. You know, there are definitely rarer and cooler cards out there, but rookie cards have always meant a ton to collectors because it's like your baby picture and what it means to your parents. You know, these athletes plop into the league as a fresh-faced newborn with big eyes and a whole world of hope and opportunity ahead of them. It's kind of beautiful in a way. Anyway, players in their professional jerseys do much better than cards in their college uniforms. Officially licensed cards are always more desirable than non-licensed cards. And right now we're getting close to a new company, Fanatics, which you may have heard of, taking over licensing of some of the major leagues in the US in just a couple of years, maybe sooner, we'll see. But for now, Panini owns the rights to the NBA, the NFL, and some fringe sports, and Topps has the rights to the MLB, and Upper Deck has the rights to hockey cards. So what about grading? And what's absolutely crazy about this hobby are the amount of nuances involved, because it's not just wanting to invest in a player like Tom Brady or Kobe Bryant the same way we would like to invest in a stock like Apple or Tesla. We've got to know the very few cards worth targeting, as well as the grading company and the grade that is worth buying, which is a whole other conversation. Personally, I like to keep it simple. PSA is arguably the safest company to send your cards to and have the best chance to easily move them in the future without any issues. BGS or Beckett Grading has also been in the industry for a long time and is the grader of some of the rarest and most valuable cards out there. And then SGC is known for being one of the top graders, if not the top grader, for vintage cards. So one of the biggest storylines over the past year is that these grading companies, especially PSA, have been overwhelmed with card submissions, and so they actually shut their doors for most of their affordable services, and this opened the doors for new companies to form and to take some market share from these more established companies. But to me, and from an investment standpoint, it's too risky to send a somewhat desirable card to a new company in order for them to grade it, because we've seen the slab of a newer or unproven grading company act as like this scarlet letter for the card, and the price difference between a 10 in one grading company and a 10 in another, even if it's supposed to be identical in terms of quality, can be massive. On the flip side, you might be able to find the card of your dreams at a very affordable price because that card is covered in a slab that very few people have confidence in. It's actually a lot like buying a beautiful, beautiful home, but the catch is that there was a triple homicide that happened in it 3 years prior. Or even better, finding this hot girl that you know looks amazing naked, but she chooses to dress horribly, horribly bad. Yeah, I like that one. That's a good analogy. Yeah. Happens a lot too, unfortunately. For me, at this point, there's just too much uncertainty around grading. So the two things I'm keeping in mind is this. One is I don't want to even buy cards from PSA that have a good chance to really go up in pop count. Or if you're new to the hobby, I don't want to buy cards that are actually more plentiful in its existence than what it appears to be right now. But we may not know how many are out there for a while, maybe a year or two. And second of all, when PSA finally catches up with its millions and millions of cards in their backlog and decides to open up more affordable tiers to the masses, what will that do to these newer companies that have been taking advantage of this opportunity to fill a need in the hobby of offering affordable and quicker grading services? Will they just be wiped out, and will no one even care about any cards in those slabs? I don't know. There's also raw cards, which is what the hobby is about, the card itself. And personally, I've made my best returns on buying cards raw and then sending them in to get graded. However, there are a couple really important things to keep in mind. And number one is buying a card online and thinking you can just send it into one of these prestigious and tougher grading companies and get a 10 out of 10 is very high risk. I mean, I've looked over cards with a magnifying lamp and did everything I thought I was supposed to, and still wound up with getting some 4s and 6s and lots of 8s and majority 9s. So it's something that's got to be learned over time, and it really helps if you're plugged into a local card community where other experienced collectors and graders can help you out. The rule of thumb I mentioned in the old video was that I would only pay for a raw card what the equivalent of that is in a PSA 8, because I have to assume that there's some damage that I don't see from the online pictures. And if I'm in person, perhaps it's a bit different because I could look over every detail. However, there still needs to be a good amount of room for error. Something to consider is that if the seller at the card show has a good amount of graded cards, but then is selling this card raw, then there's a decent chance it's because the card is not up to snub to submit for grading, and the same applies online. If, however, the seller primarily sells raw cards, whether it's in person or it's online, there's a better chance that the card is actually in fine shape and you may have a really great candidate for grading. Something that really does excite me about the hobby right now is that there's a lot of room for growth in niche sports as well as in non-sport franchises like Marvel and DC and Pokemon, and even celebrity cards, which is what I'm looking forward to the most personally. So don't feel like you have to learn about basketball or baseball to have options. Back when I made the original video, I started getting excited about basketball just because of cards. The market was just probably the most insane in basketball, but as someone that grew up in Tampa, Florida, the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are the only teams I really care to follow. Plus, personally, I'd rather watch the next Marvel movie than watch any basketball game. And so the good news is that there is a solid market and a growing community of collectors for these movie franchises that I didn't know existed, and I don't know if it was as strong a year and a half ago. So when you add all this up, to me, it's really just a set of filters which will help you eliminate 99% of cards that will be costly, shiny objects. And so number one is be so interested in the sport or franchise or player that the research side of it is very enjoyable. That is a must. Number two is to focus on cards that you find appealing to look at. And I forgot to mention this example earlier, but the single best investment I made was on a handful of base Kobe Bryant cards that just looked super cool and unique to me, and I knew others would feel the same way. And so I bought about 12 to 14 of them for $8 to $10 each, and then graded them and sold a couple of the PSA 10s for $600 to $1,000 each. And that's because I liked how they looked, and I knew other Kobe collectors would feel the same way. Number 3 is to understand scarcity, which is extremely tough to know at this point because a lot of the supply side of the equation will only be revealed in another year's time, maybe more. And that's for cards from 2019 and earlier. New stuff is even scarier, but just know that there is a supply element to the card itself. There's a supply element to the amount of that card graded in a specific grade, like a 9 or a 10. And there's also a supply side to how many of that combination is currently for sale or like listed for sale versus just locked away in a vault. Fortunately, the quality of education out there is way better now than what it was a year and a half ago, and the capabilities of these data tools are far more advanced now than in 2020. So we can actually see how much of a card's population has grown and make the most educated decision possible. Number 4 is to learn about grading. It is just a crucial part of the hobby, and it does not always make sense. It really doesn't. And it's evolving as well. But the difference between a single digit on the grade of a card can equate to a difference of thousands and thousands of dollars. So you do not want to overlook it whatsoever unless you're only going to be focusing on raw cards. So, a couple other things. I typically don't buy any newer rookies, any newer sets, any new product just because I know it's hyped, I know it's new, I know there's a demand for what's new. So, always study the charts just to see how much new product and hyped rookies tend to fall. And when you feel like the prices are lower and you feel comfortable with those prices, then you can go in. But I definitely don't want you to be just buying whatever's new and flashy unless it's the collector in you and you just want that card right now. But I'd much rather you make a better decision with your money. So from here, what I recommend you doing, and it's the same thing as I mentioned in the last video, and that is to immerse yourself in knowledge for 3 weeks before buying anything. Remember, it is very easy to spend money on all these amazing shiny objects out there, but I want you to be well informed and happy with your purchases and to stay in this hobby for a long time. So I'd rather you dive into the education side now and go to card shows and visit card shops, but don't feel obligated to spend just yet. Get involved with your local community and see how enjoyable it is just to be around others and learn about this hobby with the help of people in this community. And when you're ready to spend personally or invest, don't worry, the money will leave your wallet quicker than you could ever imagine. So, there's no rush. And I also believe that you're building a muscle by putting it off for at least 3 weeks, kind of like dieting in a sense. You're really building that muscle where the cake is right in front of you, but if you could say no to it for a good amount of time, then you're building some mental and emotional toughness. And now just a couple of great all-around stations worth watching that come to mind are the Personal Finance Dad, ignore the horrible YouTube name, his content's good, Flipping Steve, Sports Card Investor, Neo Cards and Comics, Trike 415 Sports Cards, and if you are a diehard football fan, the Fantasy Football Card Quest, who's my best friend, who we got into cards together, which is cool. And there are way more out there for sure, but again, those just came to my mind right now, and I'm usually just watching a Marvel movie or an old Matthew McConaughey rom-com in my free time at this point anyway. So just do your own research. There's a lot of great content out there. Check them out, and if you are a veteran of the hobby, please leave a little wisdom or a learning lesson from the last couple of years for the new people entering the hobby now in 2022. And I will see you guys in that next video. Enjoy.